Have we given a shout out to what's on everyone's seat yet? I don't think we have. So I'll take the opportunity to do that. So if you don't know what's on your seat, it's a bit key device from Block. You're each welcome to one of them. I call it a revolutionary new way to manage private keys and manage and self-custody your Bitcoin, largely because of the user experience of the device. And I think, Wences, you can vouch for that, right? I asked you last year, and because I thought I was going to teach you about it, and you pull it out of your drawer. Please, everyone, on behalf of Block, happy to give you one. Give it a try, and let us know what you think as well. We're proud of it. But this panel is about open source. So I'm joined by three amazing people who I've known all of you for quite a while now, and I think what they've done for Bitcoin, everyone already knows. So let's get into the topic. We're going to talk about open source, the value of open source to Bitcoin, and we've got some really good perspectives from David and Alex and Jack to hear about. So let's start with just why is open source important to Bitcoin? Jack, you're sitting next to me. Why? I mean, you've contributed so much to open source Bitcoin. Why do you do that? Why do you think it's important?
I mean, just from a perspective of probability, there's no better way to increase the probability of success than to completely open things up and build on a permissionless system. You have no clue who will come there, what they'll want to build, how they'll fill gaps, and it just for someone to come into the space and do what they want to do without having to ask for permission from a CEO, from a corporation, from a government, is pretty phenomenal. And to get to work on something that could be the open protocol for money transmission, could actually live up to the title of the white paper. I don't know of anything anywhere else where you can do that. So I think it's certainly important for all the reasons we know, which is it's verifiable. More people can participate. You don't have to trust it. You can actually do the work to verify correctness and build on top of it. But just the fact that you're increasing the probability of success by opening it up and increasing the probability that someone will take it to a level that was not imagined when it started is pretty incredible. And I don't know, like for what we have to do with money and what we want to build and how we want to use money, I don't know of any other way to actually ensure the principles and the purpose behind Bitcoin other than open source and an open protocol.
Thank you. Alex, maybe tell the audience a little bit about the type of work you do and then why open source matters for the type of work you do.
Sure. So I help run the Human Rights Foundation, which is a nonprofit that was founded about 20 years ago that focuses on helping people who live under authoritarian regimes with civil liberties. And there's a structural deficit in the world that I think is easy to empathize with and understand, where people in democratic countries that have freedoms, if you're wealthy and you do well, you can give to human rights causes and you feel good about it and you even get a tax write-off. If you live in a dictatorship or, let's say a hybrid regime and you want to help the opposition or help a human rights group, if you try to do that, your family's going to go to prison and you're going to have a really hard time. So what's happened is that almost all the philanthropy in human rights globally, call it $1 billion a year, whatever it ends up being, more than 90% of it goes back into free countries, okay? So there's almost no one giving any money to the global majority of people, 5.7 billion of which live under authoritarian regimes. So that's why we were created, was to address that gap. And open source technology might be our most potent weapon in that fight, or shield, I suppose I should say, because it's open to anyone. And it's incredible for us to talk to so many people struggling under political repression around the world and be able to connect to them with this technology. And they can all use it. And it's just been such a journey to learn through their eyes how broken money is around the world, first of all, how much financial privilege we have, but also how easily they can learn about these tools and then translate it to their local experience and then take off from there. So one of the things I used to do when I was interviewing people for some of the books and essays I've written is whenever I would kind of wrap up the interview with somebody, whether they were in I mean, everywhere from Cuba to the Middle East to different parts of Africa and Asia, I would always send them a little Bitcoin just to see how, you know, it would work, just to reinforce it in my mind. And it was just always so amazing that we didn't have to ask anybody for permission. It went through right away. It worked, and it was open, and it didn't matter what paperwork they had, what bank account they had, or what currency they had. We didn't have to talk about that. We were on an open, neutral, peer-to-peer standard. And that, to me, was super powerful. So from our perspective, this is why we invest so much in this, in helping people do what we're doing locally, and in helping build the tools and in helping build the spaces. So for us, you know, there isn't a kind of a more potent way to promote, I think, human rights in the 21st century than with open source.
Thank you for what you do, by the way. Real quick, the HRF had an event here Friday and had Freedom Fellows here, and I found it fascinating. Anna gave the presentation. She might be the best person I've ever seen present on Bitcoin. But one thing she had everyone do, not everyone there was a Bitcoiner, so she had everyone transact, and it's just fun to go back to that first that first experience and watching people do it, and it was really effective, I thought.
If I can just briefly tangent on Anna. So Anna came to us from Russia. Anna was a teacher in Russia in 2012. There was a huge protest in Russia against the government. And up until that point, she was completely not political at all. And she saw police brutality happen in front of her eyes, and it changed her mind. And she immediately sent an application as soon as she could to work for Alexei Navalny. And she was super persistent. And she was joking, like, they didn't get back to me, and I realized the person doing the hiring was on vacation. But like, she kept. So she was super, super persistent, and she got the job. And she was the financial director for many years there. And, you know, the government would surveil their finances. They would basically troll them. Sometimes she would come to work, and the balance of the Navalny Foundation's account was like a negative billion rubles. Things like that would happen. And the whole time, her colleague had figured out that they could raise money in Bitcoin, and they could do operations in Bitcoin, and it provided like a little bit of a plan B, especially for donors who didn't want the government to know that they were giving to Navalny and his organization. So it ended up being a really important part of what they did. And then they all got kicked out of Russia. They got branded an extremist organization. They fled. And they lived in Europe, and they were kind of scattered around the world. And they were able to still keep their banking, essentially, which was so fascinating to me. So Anna started getting involved in our work. And then one time about 2 years ago at an event I was doing, she came up to me and said she wanted to work for us. So I was like, yes, let's do that. So she's become our education lead. And yeah, now she's traveling around the world, going to spaces and meetups and meeting people where they are, NGOs and activists, and teaching them how to do this. And I think she's getting really good at it. Yeah, she's an awesome teacher. So anyway, shout out to Anna and all the folks working for freedom in Russia.
We were impressed. David, so you come at things from a different angle. You have your history. You worked at PayPal, right? Closed source financial company. Then at Facebook or Meta, open source, a different approach. And then you finally, I think you realize, oh, let's focus on Bitcoin, right? And then now you have your own company, Lightspark, which is a traditional Silicon Valley funded company, but you're leveraging open source. So I'm curious, what are your views on open source? How has it helped your business?
First of all, congrats, Mark, Wences, everyone here. It's like amazing to see this place here, and it's great to be here today. Thank you for having me. So, look, you know, to your point, I came from the closed payment space until I was the victim of Wences and like many others here many years ago. And to your point, when I was at Meta, we tried this Libra thing that we discussed with Jack, and Jack was like, no, if you don't do it on Bitcoin, it's not going to work. He was right. And we tried actually to make it work on Bitcoin with Lightning, early days of Lightning. It was just not going to scale to billions of people. So we went with the proprietary but open source route. And what we quickly realized is that actually the problem is if you're trying to change the way that money moves around the world in a really profound systemic way, you have to build it on top of something that's unassailable and truly neutral. And the most neutral form of money ever created is Bitcoin. And it so happens to be digital. And so if it it's neutral and it's digital and you want to keep it that way, open source is absolutely critical because it enables all kinds of different companies to build, and there's no single throat to choke. That was the biggest problem of the Libra project, is that you had, no matter how hard we tried to decentralize the damn thing, it just was still too centralized. And I think that's the value of open source. And while we've been working together on a number of projects, and we're contributing a lot of the things that we're also building to open source, because we just don't want to be the only company building on the technology that we're contributing to. We want everyone to build on it.
Quick side story. I actually interviewed with David in May of 2018. But all I talked about, I just dominated the conversation. Because all I talked about was Bitcoin. I didn't even ask what the Libra plan was. I wanted to understand your perspective on Bitcoin.
That is accurate.
And then a year later, this guy hired me. But it's interesting that the two concerns you had at the time for Libra was volatility, which is still valid depending on the use case, and then Chinese centralization of mining, which has been resolved since then. But I just remembered that. Okay, so all of you have talked about the importance of open source to Bitcoin. What about let's talk about like important projects within the space, and maybe we'll start with Alex, because another thing, Alex, you didn't mention that you do. You choose developers and projects to fund, so you have a lot of experience. 5 or so years now. And I know firsthand it's a challenging job because you're vetting like what are important technologies in the space to fund projects, people, avoid scams. So how do you go about it, and what do you consider important projects?
Yeah, and you were actually very pivotal to this, because I remember it was 2020. Pandemic was just starting to happen, spring of 2020. And we had been approached by a donor who wanted to remain anonymous, but wanted to give a modest gift, but a decent gift to help us start doing Bitcoin open source grants. And we were kind of like, should we do that? Like, should a human rights organization do that? And after some discussion, we said, yeah, why not? Let's do it. And of course, it led to the idea of like, well, if this person gives us this money, we're going to have to find more. But we said, let's try it. Let's start. And we ended up giving our first grant to Chris Belcher for his work on CoinSwap, because we really thought that clever, peaceful ways to make Bitcoin more private were very important for the folks that we were working with. And we starting to go from there. That gift to Chris, by the way, still the largest gift we ever gave, because Bitcoin was like, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000 at the time. It was like many, many Bitcoin. But we didn't quite know what to do at the beginning, so I remember calling you and getting a lot of your input in the early days in terms of what we were trying to do. But what has resulted in is something called the Bitcoin Development Fund, and we do sort of quarterly grants. We work with an amazing director named Femi, who came to us from originally Kala and then B-Trust, and he has a lot of experience working in Nigeria and many other places, and has a really great global view on how Bitcoin's changing the world. He helps us with this, and we support anywhere from 20 to 30 organizations and individuals every quarter. That's our goal for this year. And it's an interesting process, because these people have to be vetted. Our legal and policy team has to look at everything and make sure it adheres to our mission. It's a lot of work, but it's so fun to be able to support people and see what they do with it. Some of the projects that I think have been so interesting coming out of it are not necessarily code even. The idea of open sourcing education is really interesting. There's a project that came out of El Salvador called Mi Primer Bitcoin that I really love, because what they do is everything's open source. They made a diploma that's actually taught in schools in El Salvador, which helps high school kids understand how to use Bitcoin. What is it? How does it work? It's a great program, and it's in Spanish and English. And then they put that out there, and then what's happening is people who run centers like this in all these different countries make their own version. And it's all open, so they can just take it, copy it, edit it, put it up. And they have this resource where there's dozens and dozens of Mi Primer Bitcoin diploma courses now in dozens and dozens of languages. So I think the open source aspect is not just for code bases, it can be for other things too, which is really quite powerful. As far as the tools go, there's so many cool ones. I mean, I loved Rod's story about decentralizing Bitcoin mining, and that's something we've been looking at a lot, is looking at grants to that, and making gifts to people working on decentralizing mining and making it possible for people to mine at home using just off-the-shelf hardware has been really cool. But at the end of the day, one of the more interesting things I think we've been able to do is kind of ask the human rights community what do they want from Bitcoin. So we survey them and we ask what features and tools they want. And because Bitcoin is open source, we can put everybody to work through bounties, right? You can't do this in a closed source environment. So we settled a couple years ago on 11 bounties. We ended up discussing and deciding to put up 11 bounties. And another rule right now during Bitcoin's adoption period is don't denominate things in Bitcoin. It's dangerous. We were like, we're going to give 2 BTC for each one. That quickly became crazy. We had to edit our plans. But we were basically like, here, we're going to put up some Bitcoin. Please go make this. And the qualification was it had to be for products that were popular. Like, we didn't want you to just make a wallet that did X that nobody was going to use. So we kind of had, and it's a little bit vague, but it was basically like it has to be a wallet that's known and used, right? But we had all kinds of cool features that the activists wanted to see that mainly revolved around like receiving Bitcoin more privately and more easily, like something like a basically a human readable Bolt 12 offer, or like a non-custodial Lightning address generator, or even just more easy to use multi-sig for mobile devices. Like, why can't you just, at Apple level technology, put 3 phones together and make a multi-sig, right? So these are questions asked to us by activists, right? So we put it out there, and I'm really proud to say that all 11 bounties were either fully or partially claimed. And all that stuff is out there in the wild now. And that's all because of open source, right? So I think that is such a special thing that you can marshal the power of the world to get projects done, instead of just, okay, we're stuck with the 7 people who work for us, right?
Right. Jack, I know everyone knows you donate a lot to Bitcoin projects, but you don't really weigh in on like what you think where it should go, or you let other people decide that. I'm curious though. Let's imagine you're 15 years old and you're an aspiring developer. Which project would you be attracted to work on within Bitcoin?
Within Bitcoin, probably privacy. I mean, I think that's just getting Bitcoin back to its core principles, and why it was created in the first place. Again, like just looking at the title of the white paper, like we are so far away from that manifesting, and the reason why there has been so much interest in Bitcoin are those principles. So I'd start there, and then I'd do everything possible to make it more accessible to do everyday payments. And like that's why I'm here. That's what I want to see. And I think we still have that potential, but it feels so far away right now, because of the narrative around it being store of value and digital gold and period, instead of like how this is actually creating interesting small circular economies in continents outside of this one. They're live today and all over Central America, all over South America, all over Africa, and they're actually fulfilling real use cases. And it just doesn't feel like we have as much of a push in the United States because we've taken for granted and become so accustomed to Visa, MasterCard, and the banks running everything and having to get permission from them. They're partners of my company, and love y'all. But like it's not fair, and it's not going to create the greatest amount of technology innovation. And we're on this like crazy horizon right now with artificial intelligence, and we know that agent systems are going to be at scale. We know that they're going to transact, and we're going to give them agency to transact on our behalf. And we have this like perfectly positioned protocol right there ready to handle that. And we're just not seeing the intersection that I think is deserving of it. So I'd probably explore that space, but it all comes back to like daily payments for me. Like how do we actually make this the peer-to-peer payment thing that that was originally envisioned and celebrated.
Awesome. David, maybe can you speak to the open source projects you've been closest to from Lightspark? I mean, I guess LDK would be one, but Spark is something that came from your company. Maybe you can speak a little bit to what you're hoping from Spark from an open source community perspective.
And for what it's worth, I feel the push on day-to-day payments with Bitcoin very much. So we came at this problem of day-to-day payments at, looking at where Bitcoin could actually solve big problems. And, when you look at today, the world of traditional payments, you still have about $5 trillion a day that transits through SWIFT and correspondent banking that doesn't work Friday after 5 p.m. or on weekends, takes 3 to 5 days to clear, takes on average $45 to $50. And this is actually a really interesting part of the problem, which is, how do you solve like transactions between domestic real-time payment systems around the world? And how do you build that interoperability between these payment systems with the most neutral form of digital money ever created, which is Bitcoin? And so, we started attacking that problem by building on Lightning, because if you want to interoperate all of these payment systems, it has to actually move really quickly and very cheaply. And Bitcoin L1 is not that, we all know. And so we worked really hard to make Lightning more scalable, work better, more dependable, et cetera. And that's the work that we did with you on LDK to really help a number of institutions around the world to actually start using Lightning in a more scalable enterprise way. And then what we've realized over the years of trying really, really hard to make Lightning do things that it wasn't meant to do, is that there are two problems that we've concluded cannot be solved with Lightning. One is self-custody at scale, because of the inbound liquidity problem and having all of that placed in front of every channel. You want like 1 billion wallets that are supposed to receive $100. That's $100 billion of liquidity. And then the other problem was actually, if we believe that some form, and I was very schizophrenic, you and I had many conversations about this, but if you want to bring stable assets, stable coins on top of Bitcoin, then the channel-based payment system where every participant that wants to exchange said stable coin has to configure specific channels for the specific asset that it's about to transact is very much a problem. And so we have been building this L2 that's backward compatible with Lightning, that's called Spark, and that we're going to be releasing in a couple of weeks, actually. And if you want early access, hit me up after. I'll give you early access to this thing. And
that's the kind of alpha you get at Presidio Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, you've heard it here first. And we're very bullish about that because Spark can interoperate with Lightning, so you can send from a Lightning endpoint to a Spark wallet in real time, and it's almost no fee, real time. Alex, you can send money around the world to any wallet that doesn't have to have liquidity in front of a channel. We can accelerate the velocity and the utility of Bitcoin for day-to-day payments in a really seamless way. And then we'll be able to bring stablecoins on top of it because, and the reason I'm saying I was schizophrenic, and maybe this is not about open source, is like, the beauty of Bitcoin is its decentralization. And if you bring a very centralized thing like a stablecoin on top of Bitcoin, then it's more vulnerable. And I think, my view is that we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of stablecoins, and as such, the system is not going to depend on a single stablecoin. So I feel a little bit better about that. But yeah, that's the main thing we're working on right now to advance this is really Spark.
Great. By the way, I have a lot more questions prepared, but if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question, raise your hand. I think we have mics that we can hand out. I'd love to see audience engagement. So I'm sure some of you have questions for these guys. Feel free to pipe up. Next topic. Let's talk about. We've talked about open source Bitcoin development, but there can be a lot of consternation in the space about should we change Bitcoin and how do we change Bitcoin? One camp is that we need to innovate and add more features to Bitcoin, make it more expressive. There's another camp that is let's be conservative, all the way to ossify, don't change it at all. And then there's shades in between. My Twitter bio says team slow and steady, so that's my own personal opinion. But I'm curious to get takes from each of you. Sort of, what's your view on that, and what do you think is healthy for Bitcoin to get to a Bitcoin where we actually do live up to the white paper title, doing payments. All of us care about, all of us on the panel at least care about payments. We care about more than just number go up. We care about payments. So what do you think is the right philosophical framework for changing Bitcoin? David, let me start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think Bitcoin is about money. And it's not about all of these other things that, you know, that's my personal point of view, that all these other things that can exist on other chains, and, you know, that's fine. And so as far as I'm concerned, anything that makes Bitcoin better for money, as long as we don't actually, you know, give away the castle, so to speak, by doing so, is actually fair game. But I think that, you know, L2s are interesting. And as long as we can extend the capabilities of core Bitcoin with L2s in a way that's private, secure, decentralized enough, then I think that's a good balance for me, without like compromising the core. I think, you know, there are a few opcodes that could actually help make those things better over the long run. But at the end of the day, it's all about money. And personally, I'm not like that excited about all of these other applications running on other chains.
So you don't own a Quantum Cat NFT?
I do not.
Alex?
Yeah, look, I think it's important for us to focus on tools that work now for people right now, because people have problems now. So there's certain things that Bitcoin can't do right now, but eCash can do it, right? If Bitcoin's not private enough for you, eCash can do it now, and we need to invest in eCash because people need privacy now. But at the same time, I think we need to be thinking about where's Bitcoin going to be in 20, 50, 100 years. It's a civilizational project. And for us, the incentive structure is going to be what really makes, in our opinion, a change to Bitcoin more likely, if you can get a really wide consensus of people involved. And one of the things we're going to be releasing in a few weeks is a paper that a brilliant developer named Fabian has been working on with us for the last 8 months, is on something called cross-input signature aggregation. And actually, it's a really deep dive into SegWit and into, you know, everything that's made possible since then with Taproot and each kind of evolution of Bitcoin. And he does a really great job, and my head's filled with it because I read it yesterday. It's like very long and really good, and I'm excited to release it and to get it out there. But he does a really good job explaining how this is maybe a next step in the evolution of Bitcoin. And the reason I like it is because of the incentives. Because at the end of the day, if something like this comes to Bitcoin, then people are incentivized to collaborate and when they're spending on chain because they're going to save money. Now, you get this awesome benefit of privacy, but that's not why they're going to do it. So right now, the problem is if you want to achieve privacy on Bitcoin, you have to pay for it in a coin join, essentially. And if you go to court for some reason, you get in trouble, the judge is going to be like, well, why did you do that? And your only answer is going to be privacy, which should be fine, but of course we live in a world where that's not okay. If the incentives change and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, the privacy is not why I did that. I did it to save money. It could really change the world. So this incentive alignment is really, really fascinating, and it's similar to me to Lightning itself, which is like, why are all these exchanges abducting Lightning? They're not doing it for privacy reasons. They're doing it for other reasons. So if we can have that incentive alignment, I think Bitcoin will change. If you don't have that, I'm not sure it's going to change. And you know, I don't think it's Href's role to say we should do X or Y, but I do think we can do a good job helping produce research and support people doing important research on this. Yeah.
That's great. We happen to have an expert in the room on that topic. Greg is here. I learned it from Greg 7 years ago. Yep. Jack, how about you? What was my question, actually?
Changing Bitcoin. I think first and foremost, I'll just state that like ossifying, any call to ossify Bitcoin would kill Bitcoin. Like it literally turns it into a rock, because anyone who builds software and creates software systems knows they need constant maintenance, gardening, updates for security models, threats, and like Bitcoin to me represents the wisest collection of adversarial thinking into code ever invented. But that a big part of that is just constantly evolving it as well. There's new adversarial threats every single day. There's things we're talking about right now which will actually bear a significant threat upon Bitcoin. And if we don't have the grace of the Bitcoin core contributors to continue to look after that, to continue to protect the code base and defend it, and to update it with the best practices and stay 10 steps ahead of those adversaries, like we lose all of this completely. So I've just never understood that call. And I think we have a system right now that both David and Alex pointed out, where you can experiment a ton on different layers of the stack. And you can have this very, very strong foundation, which is resilient to so much. And you can have a lot of experiments like what Cashew and Fedi are doing, in addition to Lightning and all these other things. And the more of those things that exist, the better. The more experimentation we have, the more people we have like wanting to build on top of this thing, the faster we're going to get to daily usage and more use cases. And by the way, payments is the only thing over time that's going to make number go up. The number goes up because people find value in the thing. And if there's a ceiling to that value and it's only stored value, it's going to decrease in value because people are going to move to the thing that does allow the daily payments and the daily use case. That's why we're so focused on this use case, is because it makes the whole system more valuable for everyone associated with it.
That alarm there was to remind me to ask for audience questions. So does anyone have a question right now that they'd like to ask? Don't be shy. Wences.
Jack, ask you when Steve asked you what you would work on if you were 15, I think he constrained it to Bitcoin, and so you said privacy, but if you were not constrained to Bitcoin, you could work on anything you want, you were 15, would you be working in Bitcoin?
If it existed at that time, yeah, definitely. Because for me, like when I was that age, I was just being introduced to computers and the internet, and I happened to live in St. Louis, and we had this amazing university, Washington University, and they had access to the early internet because of McDonnell Douglas, and the whole military-industrial complex that we benefit from in Silicon Valley was in St. Louis in a much smaller way. And I found Usenet, I found alt cypherpunks, and like that crowd was just like incredible, like it just so inspiring, and it really got me into cryptography and applied mathematics and computer science and all these things. And I just think that intersection is amazing. But I think today there's three. All I want to do right now is just open protocols, open source, and building business on top of it, because I think you can build extremely valuable businesses on top of it. But there's three buckets. I think we have a solve for the money bucket in Bitcoin. We have a lot of work to do. I think we need a better solve for media, and specifically social media. And what I'm fascinated with right now is Nostr, because it is truly permissionless in the same ways that Bitcoin is truly permissionless. We tried this thing with Blue Sky, but you have to ask for permission to really update that and to scale it. In Nostr, you don't. And then we don't have an answer for intelligence. And the intersection of all three of those buckets, and having open protocols, having open source, having a truly permissionless way to build on top of it, I think is phenomenally interesting. And we know those intersections are going to be meaningful in our lives in the next 5 years, not just the next 10. So that, like, if I was 15 right now, I'd be looking in that space and probably leaning a little bit heavier on the intelligence side, because like it's being captured right now. Like it's literally being captured, and there's not enough resources in mindshare to go after it. I know like HRF is like pushing this, and there's others, but I think it's a significant risk, and I think it's a significant risk to us in the Bitcoin space as well.
Actually, oh, go ahead, Mark.
We got another here.
Yep. Mark, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Patricia. I didn't see you.
Okay,
Sorry.
I'm
Go ahead,
gonna
Patricia.
I'm just curious, first of all, thanks for being here. From a nonprofit perspective and from an industry perspective, are there any other open source adjacent projects to Bitcoin that you're excited about? Blue Matt and I love to complain. We're talking about RT and like supporting Tor and what we can do there for like privacy holes and security holes, and how the wallets we're using have a lot of issues. Just kind of curious if you guys have any exciting topics you'd like to talk about that could help Bitcoin, but maybe we're not chatting about?
Well, for us, we have a focus on Bitcoin because it's so relevant to the work we do to help vulnerable people. There are other technologies, however, that are really interesting to us. One is Nostr. We've started doing a lot with Nostr. We just did a whole event where we brought activists from around the world together with Nostr developers, and we're working on making Nostr more resilient, hopefully, in a way where institutions can be on Nostr, and they can have a way where if they lose their key, it's not the end of the world for that identity chain. Like they can have almost like a multi-sig type way to interact with Nostr, so to make it more available and accessible for people still in this kind of world to access. We love Nostr for many ways and for many reasons. Mainly, again, because it's unstoppable and it'll work for anybody anywhere. The other one is the eCash, which just is worth dwelling on for a second. It's a very old technology when it comes to something like Bitcoin. It predates Bitcoin by many decades. It was invented here in the Bay Area in the 1980s by David Chaum, right? So it just didn't work very well with fiat money, is what it sort of turns out. It was hard to run, especially with all these regulations that came in the 90s and early 2000s in the banking sectors. But it works really well on Bitcoin, is what we've seen. So we love eCash for a lot of reasons. It's not a replacement for Bitcoin. It's a complement for Bitcoin in the same way that, I think Nostr is a complement to Bitcoin. And you're going to see a lot of other open source technologies grow in this way. And I agree with what Jack said about like AI agents are going to start to interoperate in this way as well. So I'd say those are a couple that we're actively investing in and really excited about.
Yeah, we're also excited about Nostr, and particularly the aspect of Nostr Wallet Connect, and how you can actually delegate authority or the ability to push and pull funds for wallets, etc. And especially in line with what Jack was talking about around agentic commerce and like everything that has to do with AI stuff and AI inference as well. The ability for you to actually delegate access to specific Nostr endpoints so that you could decentralize, for instance, inference for AI is kind of an interesting idea as well. So lots of interesting stuff there.
Any more to add? Or we're good?
No, good.
Okay. Thanks for the question. Mark?
All three of you have worked with government, have unique perspectives on governments in various ways. And how alarming is this news about the UK demanding certain types of access to iPhones, not just for Brits, but for everybody? And do we need or do we have a sort of open source cell phone project that can preserve some privacy?
I mean, in terms of the threat, Alex should speak to this, but like I think it's super negative, and I think Signal and Meg are like huge fighters on the side of doing the right thing. I think all this ebbs and flows, so I'm not worried about it over the long term, but in the short term, like it's pretty punitive and worrisome. It doesn't feel like it's something that's going to necessarily spread because there's so much pushback on it, but who knows? But I do think like the more we in this space can help fund like the Signals of the world or the SimpleX. There's another competing protocol which is fully decentralized, doesn't require any identity in the same way that Signal does. And just looking at those core parts of our services, such that people continue to benefit from these privacies, so they can feel more free. There's projects out there that are at scale that can receive funding and can actually go toe to toe with a lot of these government policies without them being able to do anything to counter it.
And maybe you have a word about the open source phones, like software you can run on a phone, like the operating system.
Yeah, well, we have an open source operating system right now, which is Android, and there's a bunch of really interesting projects. Calyx is one. What's the other? Graphene. So they're small. It speaks to a very niche crowd. All of this the market is dictated by convenience and accessibility. There are very few people in the world, and I love these people, but there are very few people in the world that are yelling out for privacy and security and censorship resistance, even though they say they aren't. They say they are. They really aren't, because convenience always wins. And you know, if that were not the case, like, everyone would be using Bitcoin today, and everyone would be using these private systems, but they're just not. So I think you know, they're going to be small for quite some time until they're necessary. And I think building that third option always in parallel is great. Like, Bitcoin doesn't need to be at massive scale today. It just needs to be ready for when people need it. And Nostr doesn't need to be at massive scale today, but it needs to be ready for when people want to reach for it. And the same is true for the intelligence stuff and the private communication and the operating system stuff as well.
And any other? Yeah, sir.
Jack, a comment about the capture of intelligence, and I'm just curious if you have a thought about the strategy with ostensibly it must really be the Chinese with this recent DeepSeek thing, and if that's, you know, possibly going to move the needle towards open source.
I think it's one of the greatest gifts I've seen since Bitcoin, honestly, is this model, and the fact that, like, the Chinese government or people are fighting American innovation with open source is like, we were talking about this morning, like, it never would be considered to be on my bingo card ever. But I think it really opens the space a ton. And again, like, it's such a blessing and a gift that we got this, and we can't, you know, we can't scuttle the opportunity.
But why would they do what they're doing?
I don't know.
If they didn't open it, it wouldn't have really been noticed, really.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't enough of an advance over the state of the art. The openness is the headline for it. And
Just to fuck with us, which worked. And, like, I mean, you saw the market, and I think it's super smart. But again, like, we can decide to benefit from it and take advantage of it or not. And it's interesting because I see, like, a lot of these AI companies are going the opposite direction now because of that, and becoming a little bit more closed off and closer to the chest, and that worries me. But I don't know. Like, I think it's amazing. We're going to take, you know, full advantage of this gift.
Andrew?
Thank you. Yeah, my voice is a bit tired. So I was really happy to hear Alex talk about cross-input signature aggregation in terms of the way that it changes incentives for privacy, right? And there's maybe a problem in this space, and well, every space, where the people building cool crypto stuff like signature aggregation are kind of myopic, right? They're sitting there, like, working on cool technical problems and, like, trying to solve technical problems, right? Which signature aggregation is cool. It makes the SIG smaller. There's some cool crypto, like getting security proofs to work, and so on. And the four of you on stage have pretty high-level public-facing roles in which I think there's a lot of incentive failures in the world that you guys could probably recognize that the technical crowd maybe wouldn't, right? And I've been hearing a lot of humble comments about, like, the core developers defending the protocol and so forth. But I think there's a role for, a really important role for people like you folks who maybe feel like you're not technically in the weeds, but that's really important, that you can see the human impact and the incentive impact and the economic impact on how these different protocols affect Bitcoin and affect the world. So these questions of incentives, right? And of what's good to prioritize from a technical perspective that would be, or I guess, what technical priority should we have that would be good for the world rather than just being kind of interesting technically or accessible technically or what? I don't have a question, but what do you guys think about that?
I could just quickly react to that. It's actually a great point in that that's why the interdisciplinary nature of spaces like this are so important. I remember talking to a developer about this issue, and they're like, well, you know, in one way you could only really save 15%, and I'm like sitting there saying like a half basis point changes the world. What are you talking about? If you're saying if Alice and Bob could either send Bitcoin and, pay a Bitcoin, or they could pay 0.85 Bitcoin, what do you think they're going to do? Like, that's an incredible savings, but they just didn't think about it that way. They were like, it's not that much. So I think having the interdisciplinary group of people from different backgrounds is hyper important, and you're building that here, which is going to be great.
Yeah. By the way, for people who don't know Andrew, he's one of the smartest people in the space. And I actually learned about proof of work from your writing, 10 years ago, 12 years ago? So thank you for that. I'll answer a little bit too. I consider, or your non-question I'll answer. I consider it part of my job, right? I am, I do my best to be close to technical development and developers and understand it. Not as well as like you and Greg and Lalu, but I learn from you guys, and that does influence myself thinking about which projects to fund and what should be priorities within Bitcoin. And I'm always learning too. There's been projects like Braidpool is a project where I heard of it like 5 years ago, and Bob has bugged me over the years to fund it, and I just never carved out the time to study it and learn it, and I finally did about a year ago, and now Spiral's funding it. So that's kind of on me, but I'm very open to learning, and I see how Braidpool could be a long-term. It could solve one of a fundamental centralization pressure issue we have in mining. So that's my take on that. Any other questions in the audience? Yeah. Hey, Pierre.
Hey, so I think one of the most controversial debates in this space is the store value versus payments, and it's come up a few times. And I've also, there's this stablecoin bill going through Congress, and I've heard people in that sphere absolutely say, hey, once we have stablecoins, we won't need Bitcoin anymore. And so with that framing in mind of, if the government is friendly with stablecoins, and so you can get all of these benefits of crypto technology, let's say, without the volatility of Bitcoin and without, the wanting to hold it because you think the value is going to go up issue. To Jack's point, are Bitcoin payments always going to be a thing of last resort, or do you see a market dynamic where Bitcoin payments are actually just more competitive than stablecoin payments, let's say?
Happy to take that one. Hey, Pierre. Look, so here's how I think about things. I think, Bitcoin payments mean very different things to different people. And, I personally feel like it's just going to be a long time arc before people start using Bitcoin, the unit of account, to start buying things in developed economies. But I believe that the time for Bitcoin to be the global neutral settlement asset between all the different payment systems and all the different types of endpoints that exist that want to pay one another is now. And when you look at what the vast majority of people want to do in the world right now is, use their home currency if they have a good stable currency for payments. And the problem is actually, and the friction is between those payment systems typically and not domestically, where Bitcoin can actually play a big role. I think stablecoins is a little different, right? Right now, I personally think that, they're a tad overhyped, but they solve two problems. One is it's a US dollar bank account for people who can't have one. And, that's super important for a number of different people in different countries, like whether they're in Argentina, in Venezuela, in Turkey, where their home currency is so bad and hyperinflated that they're actually going to go to the dollar or Bitcoin, but the dollar is kind of better for everyday transactions. And I personally think that Bitcoin is going to be the network that is going to win the race to be the default standard protocol for stablecoins as well. I think, I'm a minority in that world to think that, but I actually think that that's the way it's going to play out. If you look at every other internet protocol before, you don't have 12 different protocols for email. You have SMTP. And that's one protocol for one thing. And I think Bitcoin will be that for every kind of value transfer, whether it is the asset or it's actually used to transport other assets. and other currencies. So that's the way I see it, and that's what we're building towards.
It's kind of interesting that one of the things Bitcoin does is it makes the existing system compete a little more and improve a little more. So you had the innovation of Bitcoin, and then people figured out, oh, we could just put dollar credits in a way that is completely somewhat permissionless, at least. But look, at the end of the day, the stablecoins are just, maybe depending on your opinion, an improved dollar. They don't address the issues in the Bitcoin white paper really in any meaningful way. They can be censored, they can be stopped, they can be shut down tomorrow. And we be a little careful with them. I mean, we have to admit at HRF, obviously, that they are very helpful humanitarian technologies, because if we're going to live in a dollar world, it makes sense, and it's only fair that everybody have access to the best fiat currency, right? So we see that and we observe that. We teach Bitcoin. At the end of our class, we show people, if they need to without KYC and stuff, how can you go into stablecoins? We do show that because people want that. But we're not going to teach a stablecoin class because that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to spread freedom money. And another kind of tangent there that I wanted to point out to show the power of a space like this is what we've seen around the world in this kind of emerging way for people to live in Bitcoin and spend in Bitcoin at scale. And it's all because of spaces. So there's a space in Costa Rica called Bitcoin Jungle. There's a space on the African continent that's rooted a little more ephemerally, but it's the Africa Bitcoin Conference. And then there's a space that our friend Nifty over here has created called BTC++, and it kind of moves around the world. But all three of these spaces brought people together who then figured out how to bridge Bitcoin with local fiat currency. So in Kenya and in Brazil and in Costa Rica, you can live in Bitcoin and you can just walk up to anybody and pay them through the Lightning Network, which is acting as like a little bit of like a connective tissue between you living in freedom money and the merchant. The merchant just gets the local currency. So in Costa Rica, it's like a mobile app, mobile money, Simpe. They get the Costa Rican currency. In Kenya, it's the same thing. They get M-Pesa. And in Brazil now, because of some of the developers who worked on a hackathon last week or something like that, you can get the Brazilian currency, but you can live in Bitcoin. And I'm starting to see this happen at scale. And this happened with what is it? Is it Azteco? Azteco? So Azteco is super dominant in South Africa. So people in South Africa do the same thing. They can live in Bitcoin and they can spend it in any store in the country. So you're starting to see it possible for people to actually live in Bitcoin at scale. Hundreds of millions of people can have access to this stuff. And it's all because of spaces. And I think that this space is going to be important not just to spread awareness here in the Bay Area, but also to be a brother or sister organization to all the other spaces and to connect. One of the ones that we helped start is in India. India is a very important country for a million reasons, but it's one of the countries that I think in the next 50 years is going to play one of the biggest roles in Bitcoin because of the public interest in gold and the public skepticism of digital payments. And people in India who we were connected with applied to us to create basically a Presidio Bitcoin, but in India. And they did it, and they have it now, and they run it now. So there's so many cool things that you all can do when you link space to space to space. It's very exciting.
Let's wrap up with the final question. We haven't talked about like funding and challenges of funding open source development. One of the goals of Presidio Bitcoin is an outreach to Silicon Valley, big tech. I know that when Jack created what's now called Spiral, but Square Crypto, and I joined, one thing you told me, Jack, was that you wanted Block to fund it and not you personally, because you wanted to demonstrate how a corporation could give back and participate in open source development. So ever since I agreed, and I've hoped to inspire other dev orgs. There have been other dev orgs that have emerged, but not from corporations. We've failed at that so far. So what's our message to Silicon Valley and big tech firms to get them engaged and involved in open source Bitcoin development?
I think it goes back to, there's been a lot of conversation around incentives. So I think it goes back to aligning those incentives. Like a healthy, strong, usable Bitcoin helps Block and my company immensely. Because again, we have to go around the world and ask for permission just to put our product in those markets. And having Bitcoin allows us to be in every single country, every single market, every single population, day one, as you would expect from any internet company. So it really aligned with our incentives. We don't know necessarily what is best for Bitcoin, the protocol, but we knew that we could pay people to figure that out and do it, and they've done it. And it was a hope that like other companies would do it. And I think there is an alignment of incentive for them to do these things. But I don't know, they just can't get over that initial hump of just flashing it and starting it and then seeing what happens. And I don't know if it's, there's no amount of messaging that is going to change it. It's just they have to arrive at the same conclusions that we did. And maybe over time they will, but if they don't, I think that's okay too, because I think there is more interest in funding open source, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in-house, and there's really great organizations that if you don't want to make the decisions around where the grants go, they can help you, so like OpenSats and Brink and HRF and others, and I hope we see a lot more of that, because there is a single point of failure right now in centralization of open source Bitcoin funding. I'm part of the problem. There's just not enough organizations. There's not enough people who are giving money, and we do need to fix that because there's just so much more work to do, and we can't do it with just the current resources we have.
Sadly, almost everyone's in this room, right? I mean, obviously you dominate with funding, but like Wences and Mark and John Pfeffer's not here, but there's not that many. So I know Wences and Mark are doing an event in a week, next Friday, to try to help educate like why it matters. Hopefully that goes well. I think we can do a lot more here, and I don't know if Alex or David, if you have any other comments on that, like any ideas. Also for me, like with Spiral, feedback or ideas on like how can we reach out to Silicon Valley better.
Look, I agree with Jack. I think it's all about aligning incentives. If those companies care about Bitcoin because they're building on it or they're dependent on it, then they'll start funding more, open source work on it. And that's our job to make it more useful so that they care.
I think you're also a great case study. From going from the world you came from, PayPal and Facebook Meta, to choosing to work on this and choosing to be more open source, and highlighting that in your story, I think is really important for this crowd in this area, because they don't hear it enough, and right now it's just being drowned out by all the AI stuff and the hype, and that worries me. But like you getting out on stages and you telling that the why, I think helps us a dramatic amount.
Great. I think we can go on forever, but we're a little over. So let's give a round of applause to our panelists.